Okay, here we go. Let's try another video. This video is called, What Can We Do During the Suffering? God has many of us going through trials and tribulations and tormenting, and some of us are in the fiery furnace of suffering where God is working on our soul, where He's sanctifying our soul. And what can we do during the suffering to alleviate some of the pain? And it's really quite simple. You see, the more that we trust God, the more peace we're going to have during the different trials and tribulations God has us going through. But how can we trust God during the midst of the suffering? Well, God and His Son Jesus are perfect, and they never make mistakes. Jesus has never made a mistake. Never. Not once. Nowhere in the universe has Jesus ever made a mistake. Never. And the truth is He's not making a mistake in your life either. He's not messing up in your life. He's not making a mistake. His plan for your life is perfect. It's absolutely perfect. So does God use suffering in our lives at different times? Of course He does. Look what Paul went through. Paul was shipwrecked and beaten and tortured and imprisoned and practically murdered and practically starved to death and freezing cold at nighttime with no blankets and living as a homeless person sometimes. Of course God does this. Of course. We have to be honest about this. What about me? God's been having me go through suffering for 52 years now, starting as a little tiny boy all the way to tonight. And how am I getting more and more peace about this as the years pass by? By realizing that God never makes mistakes. And He's not making a mistake in my life. His plan for my life is perfect. It's absolutely perfect down to the microscopic level, and there never will be a mistake in my life. Not by God. Never. And that's the level of trust that we want to work on, that we want to strive towards, and that we want to practice. So when I'm going through heart-wrenching situations, I got to practice that God knows what He's doing with me, that He's sanctifying my soul, that He's changing me slowly into the image of His Son Jesus more and more and more. And sometimes God does use suffering. He did with Jesus, His own Son. And if He did with Jesus and if He did with Paul, you better believe He's going to do it to you and me. Why? Because going through different levels of suffering can be very good for us. Some of the good fruit that we get by going through suffering is, number one, we become more humble. The more suffering I go through, the more humble God is changing me into. And I'm becoming nicer and kinder and more loving and more sympathetic and more understanding of others and more patient and more compassionate. And I'm seeking out Jesus more. And I'm bowing down at the foot of his throne more, face down on the ground. And I'm realizing more and more just how helpless I am before his throne. And all of this is wonderful, and it's happening to you, and it's happening to me, partially because God has us go through suffering. So when you go through suffering, realize Jesus never makes mistakes, that he is perfect, his plans are perfect, his plan for your life is absolutely perfect, that everything that he does in your life is absolutely perfect down to the microscopic level, and that you are going to bear more and more Christ-like fruit as we go through suffering sometimes. So, to wrap up this video, the more you trust God during the suffering, generally speaking, the better your whole life is going to go. The more you trust God, the better your life is going to go. The less you trust God with this suffering, the worse you're going to do emotionally, the worse you're going to do mentally and psychologically, the worse you're going to do spiritually. It's all about trusting God during the good times, during the bad times, and during the terrible times. It's all about trusting God. Amen to that.